See, that's the button that you can press and you can add people. That button.
This, yeah. Okay. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Oh, it's Mommy and Daddy.
Guten Abend. Hi, Rich.
You can do this. You can do this. Add.
Hey guys.
What's
Hi,
up?
Rich.
How you doing?
Good, good. How are you? Nice seeing your
Doing
face.
good. Can you see me okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
How's things in California?
It's pretty good. We've been getting quite a bit of rain. It's a little chilly out here, but I'm not complaining. I've got my family here. We're going on a month of sequestration, but we've got plenty of room. I got all my kids around, so my life, my day-to-day, actually, I'm in a very privileged situation because my day-to-day is remarkably unchanged from what it usually is. And I know that's not the case for most people, but I'm still able to work and kind of do my thing and train and the like. So all is fine.
Yeah, we're all pretty lucky to be away from the big cities and close to nature. So I'll just say a few words to start off here. So we've got a few friends in common. You've interviewed some of the runners we work with closely, like Knox and Ricky Gates, and we got introduced by our friend Connor, who we spoke to yesterday.
Right.
And your story is really fascinating, and we're incredibly flattered to finally talk to you. Tom's
I appreciate you guys having me on. This is really fun.
This is just gonna turn into like a man crush.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm gonna grab one thing. Hold on 1 second. So after I met up with Knox, he hooked me up with you guys, and you guys sent me these, which are I just love these trail shoes. Yeah. Keep them in here. They're just so beautifully designed and exquisite. So thank you for that. You sent me a whole bunch of cool gear. I'm wearing my shirt and everything. So I love what you guys do and your the ethos that you infuse all of your products with, everything that you guys are about. I think it's really inspiring.
No, it really means a lot. So you've played such an important role in a time that I think is sort of at the reaching a climax right now, in which a lot of people our age are really confused about the world and trying to sort of make up their minds with where things are headed and what our role is going to be in all of this. And it's really you, along with some other incredible podcasters like Joe Rogan and Sam Harris and people like that have become role models, I would say, for a generation of people. And we talk a lot about the intersection of sport and spirituality, of sport as a way of, as a vehicle for transformation. You yourself had like a Eureka moment in your late 30s, early 40s, I believe. There's that moment I remember reading about when I think you were about to go up a set of stairs and something changed for you, right? It was sort of you reached a physical threshold that sort of precipitated what I consider to be a spiritual journey, right? That was rooted in a physical issue.
Yeah, very much so. I would say that throughout my 20s, I was kind of lost and adrift struggling with substance dependence issues and kind of lost my way. I was able to get sober at 31, and between 31 and 39, 40, I was really intent upon repairing all the wreckage that I had created as a result of my drinking career. And it was very important to me during that period of time that I become a responsible member of society. I was somebody who, as a young person, had demonstrated a fair amount of promise that I had squandered. And I really wanted to recreate myself in the image of what I thought I could be when I was a younger person. And for me at that time, it meant kind of acclimating to the corporate lifestyle. So I became this corporate lawyer, and throughout my 30s, I worked really hard to kind of climb that ladder and make my way up the senior associate track, up to partner and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until, I was 39 that I started to have kind of an existential crisis about what I was doing, and a realization that I was really living somebody else's life, or I was pursuing a dream that wasn't really anything I consciously chose for myself, but was really kind of more of a social expectation, I suppose. And I really struggled with that for a long time. And everything, I knew that I was not living the life that I was meant to be living, but I had no idea of what that might be, because I had never really invested in that process of self-inquiry to be connected enough with my higher self to be able to trust my instincts. And that process for me began when I was 31 and got sober, and that was the kind of beginnings of my process of living a more spiritual based life. But it took me 10 years before those tools really kicked in to be applicable to my life beyond just not using drugs and alcohol. So I had this kind of health scare that coincided with an existential crisis. During my 30s, I put on a bunch of weight. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was eating fast food. I'd 50 pounds overweight and sluggish and lethargic, kind of like coasting into middle age as this couch potato lawyer. And I had a moment on the staircase going up to my bedroom one night where I couldn't, I'd been a swimmer at Stanford, and I had to pause up a simple flight of stairs because I was so winded and out of breath and had tightness in my chest. But it was really, that was a reckoning for me, but it was really also a crystallization of this existential crisis that I was having, where it just became very clear to me, like everything that I was doing was wrong. And I really needed to take a step back and reconstruct my life from the ground up and create an entirely new foundation. And, that's taken me many years to do. It's remarkable to me still that I get to, sit here and talk with you guys about this process, because really for me, it was just about finding a way to live from a more heart-centered place and to connect more deeply with myself, and perhaps find a way to figure out, what my unique song is, and to fulfill some promise that I had to myself to, pursue a career that allowed those two things to, coexist with each other.
Yeah.
Right. And you talk a lot about like that idea of the pain of sitting in the moment of where you are right now, exceeding that pain and that threshold of pain of the change that one would be about to make in situations like that. What were those early toolkits or those tools that really helped you, both when you were 31 and then also when you were 39? Like, what helped you, kind of those early things that you were doing that moved you along to the next step, so to speak?
Well, it began with the tools that I've learned in the rooms of recovery. The 12 steps have been instrumental in helping me kind of deconstruct my life and create a foundation for a new one. The simple process of doing an inventory and then making that a daily practice, like trying to figure out what my part is in every situation, and kind of deconstructing my resentments and my fears and my angers to pull the veil back and reveal, these repetitive looping behavior patterns and character defects that continue to manifest in my life. So that was the beginning of self-understanding, but putting that into practice has been a different process. And for me, meditation has been crucial, mindfulness practices, And truly, endurance sports is what really unlocked it for me. And that's why I call, like, everything that I've done athletic has really been a manifestation of a spiritual journey towards, greater self-authenticity and self-actualization. And there's something very unique and specific about long distance endurance pursuits and ultra endurance, where you're spending a tremendous amount of time by yourself with an elevated heart rate, but not so winded that you can't focus on anything else. And it allows you for the mind to ruminate and to be present with yourself in a very specific way that I wouldn't call meditation, but is kindred to that, in the sense that you can't escape yourself. And there's something about that low grade pain that connects you with who you are, and allowed me the bandwidth to really ask these questions of myself, and over time figure out answers to them.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think we can both relate to it. I mean, we were, partying like animals in New York in our early 20s.
Yeah. we were very good at it.
Where were your spots? Where was the place? Because I lived in New York too. I'm like, part of me misses that. Some of
the same parties.
Yeah.
And, we just took it all the way to the extreme, the partying, the working, the New York life. And then something switched. For me, it was very much it started with my body. My body just collapsed at one point, and at that point I was introduced to meditation, and that was my breakthrough in many ways, that just led to a more examined and thoughtful and inquisitive way of life. And around the same time, Tom went through a breakup, found running, and started taking running a lot more seriously. So for us, it was really about that dynamic, between the two of us, right? What we were both going through in our personal journeys. That
what's interesting about that, sorry to interject, but what I find really interesting about both of your stories and how they relate to mine, is that these changes were motivated by pain, a breakup, your body failing, in my case, also my body failing and my spirit faltering. And it's interesting that we look at these as crises or things to be avoided, and yet they've been these tremendous gifts and these accelerators in our life. And these changes that we've all made, I think, are available to all of us if we're paying attention, and we can make those changes short of experiencing those crises. But there's something very specific about those painful moments that allow us to expand our awareness and take that leap, or put in motion these actions that ultimately change our lives wholesale.
Right. And that was something that Max and I were talking a lot about is today, is kind of that relationship. We listened to your conversations with Zach, and kind of how necessary is pain in terms of cultivating progression and maybe a grateful nature. Like, are they two sides of the same coin, so to speak, for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, for me, I'm pretty stubborn, and I still have plenty of errant behavior patterns that, I should change, and, I'm refusing to. And I would imagine it'll require some other painful moment in my life in order to, continue to walk that ladder upward. And I'm always hopeful. I am adapting and making changes short of that, but there, I don't know. I think if we're paying attention, if we're really connected to ourselves, and we are engaged in a meditation practice, and we know how to be present with ourselves, and we know how to be observant to our environments, that the signals are around us all the time, and they begin as subtle, but if we don't heed them, then the volume slowly gets turned up until, not paying attention to it becomes impossible. So I think it's your choice where along that spectrum you decide enough is enough, or now is the time to, address that thing that you've been in denial about, or been, refusing to acknowledge.
It's interesting. I mean, you talk a lot about balance as well. And I think many of us, if we were asked, like, what do you really want? We just want to live a balanced and peaceful life in many ways, right? Yeah. And at the same time,
do we though?
I think
I don't know that we do.
when there's a
Yeah.
recession, we want to live a balanced and peaceful life. When there's not,
Yeah.
we live an answer.
I know.
At the same time, I catch myself going from one extreme to the next, you know, and I'm often put on the spot for you know, for taking my meditation practice to unnecessary levels of extremity, you know, going on, you know, long 10-day retreats and just cutting myself off from the world. and you know, you see it with Tom in running, and obviously you've done some pretty crazy you know, endurance challenges. And you know, the question is, why do we do that to ourselves? Like, do we really always need to push ourselves to that level of human potential, that level of physical threshold, to ultimately get back to a place where we can just be like, okay, this is a pretty good place to hang out?
Yeah, I think it's different for different people. You know, long ago, I let go of this guilt that I used to carry around because I would vacillate between extremes, and I would feel bad about myself because everybody told me I was supposed to be living a balanced life and that we should aspire to some level of balance. And at some point, I just abandoned that, and I, you know, embraced and accepted the fact that I'm prone to extremes, and these extremes have been my greatest teachers. And I think it's important to telescope out and look at your life in a macro sense. So what I mean by that is, over the long term, it's important that your life is balanced, that your relationships are attended to, that the important things are, you know, getting the attention that they deserve. But in the micro day to day, for you to go all in on something because that's what you're passionate about, or because this is an experience that's going to be a journey of learning for you, I think is totally fine, as long as at some point that pendulum swings back to its center point. It's fine. And for me, it's like being out in the extremes is where I can connect with myself in a more profound way, because there's an honesty in those experiences that we don't find in our normal lives. Now, you know, I don't feel, you know, I'm 53 now, like I'm not as compelled to go out and compete in ultra endurance sports as I was 10 years ago. Like I've learned a variety of lessons through those pursuits, and there's something about that world and that subculture that I love, and I will always remain connected to it. But my life is very different now, and my priorities have shifted. And so the extremes that I'll find myself, you know, involved in are more creative pursuits as opposed to athletic pursuits, whether it's a podcast or, you know, a book project or the like. You know, in order for me to get the most out of those experiences, like I really do need to block everything else out and go into a bit of a black hole. And that's okay. I think that's okay. You know, it's not okay if I'm ignoring my children or my marriage falls apart, but you know, I'm not interested in, you know, walking this earth as a dilettante or being, you know, just good enough. I'm interested in pushing myself to see what I'm truly capable of. And I think that's something to be celebrated. And I find that a lot of people sort of shy away and, you know, revert back to this idea that we should all be living balanced lives. And like, who's living a balanced life, and what is this aspiration that we're supposed to be adhering to? Like, I don't quite understand it.
Right.
Well, life is inherently unbalanced, right? If you think about it.
Yeah.
And in many ways, the question I ask myself is, you know, we all somehow travel up, try and get up the mountain one or the other way. Some do it more aggressively than others, whether that's in sport or in meditation, right? We somehow feel like there's something up there, there's something on the other side. And the question really becomes is, you know, who have you become in the process, right? Who, if you look back, what has changed, right? What have you learned, and how are you growing as a person?
How does that work?
Oh, sorry. One more thought on that. I mean, I would just say it's also important to have enough self-awareness and understanding to recognize when that impulse to chase something is true and legitimate, like you're really, you know, searching for something beyond, and whether, and by contrast, it's it's about running away from yourself because there's something that, you know, within you that makes it difficult for you to be, you know, in your body. And I think there's a lot of people who will tell you, oh, I'm doing this, I'm, you know, training for a marathon or whatever it is. I'm going to, you know, I'm going to an ashram. And what they don't understand is that they're really just, they're running away from themselves. So that's the kind of demarcation line that I would put up with.
Right. Are there specific things that you wish that you could tell your 20-year-old self? Like, is there one thing that whether it doesn't have to necessarily be a tool, it could also be a mantra or an idea of life that you've developed in the last 15 to 20 years, but is there something you could tell that kid?
Well, the first thing I'd say is to tell them to stop drinking. That would have been very helpful.
That easy.
Yeah. Short of that, I definitely would not have listened. I can tell you that.
Right.
You know, I went right from college to New York City and started working at a law firm. And the advice that I would have given myself is to not be in such a rush to pursue some traditional notion of career, but to find a way to invest in experience. I think that this idea that at 19, 20 years old, you're supposed to know what you want to do with your life is complete insanity. Our spectrum of experience is so limited at that point, even if you've gone to a great university. And I think travel and experience is really important. And I think that the kind of corollary to that is to find a way to live very lean, like to embrace, you know, a minimalist lifestyle so that you're not servicing debt or living to, you know, cover a lease payment or a car payment. And then you become indentured to, you know, a cycle that you'll wake up from 10 years later and realize you never went to Argentina or you never, you know, hiked Annapurna or whatever it is. So the 20s, I think, are a time for those kinds of experiences. So live lean, and whatever, you know, money that you can cobble together should be directed towards broadening your worldly experience so that you can be in a better position to make a judgment call about what interests you and the kind of, you know, path that you want to pursue for yourself.
Right. So we didn't do that. But what about the 30s then?
Yeah. You know, I mean, if you didn't do it in your 20s, then like start doing it in your 30s. I mean, here's the one thing that I would say is, you know, and this is like, I tweeted this like 2 years ago and people still retweet it. Like this idea that, you know, your story is told by the time you're in your 30s is insane. Like I'm still figuring things out and I feel like I'm only hitting my stride now at 53. You know, by society standards, I'm like this old man, but I feel like a kid. And I think it's, you know, empowering to help people understand that you can always reinvent yourself, that, you know, that die is never fully cast. And that's why I think it's so important to live minimally and not be, you know, sort of so leveraged in your lifestyle that you become trapped. It took me a long time to climb out of that. And, you know, whether you're in your 30s or even in your 40s, like I didn't start my podcast until I was like, I don't know, 46, 47 or something like that. And now at 53, it's really hit a gear, you know, that it wasn't hitting a couple of years ago. And I feel like everything is just, you know, I'm now like exactly where I'm supposed to be. And my whole life has led to this point. And it just took me a really long time. And that's okay.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the really beautiful thing, or the really scary thing in a way, right? When you move to places like New York, everyone has their story figured out, and you sit down and you compare yourself to them, and you get kind of shocked, and you want to reach that threshold of also having an identity at such a young point rather than kind of having a certain openness. So it's such an interesting, at least for it seems all of us, such a painful journey to pretend to the point of being broken down to then come back with a certain openness and approach that.
Where you force yourself into an identity because you just feel like you need to turn up in New York as a made man, right? Even if you're 22. Yeah. And
well, that's, you know, that's the place where people go to pursue their dreams, and there's a lot of fronting and a lot of image consciousness, you know, that goes on there. But I also see at the same time we're in this, you know, really interesting moment where we're valuing masculine vulnerability in a way that, you know, just was not accept. When I was living in New York, you know, in the early 90s, like no one was going around being vulnerable about their emotions. And I think, you know, we're seeing that kind of ethos flourishing right now, and a new version of what it means to be a man and to embody the masculine. And I think that that's giving men in particular, like, you know, permission to think more broadly about, you know, how they want to live.
Right.
Totally.
And do you think that will cause structural changes in society at large as those roles evolve and change?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're already seeing that. I mean, I think the disintermediation of media, and the fact that, you know, we can have this, we're essentially doing a TV show right now, right? Like, it's crazy that we're able to do this and put out a message that you would never find in mainstream media when there were just 3 channels and, you know, CNN. And I think, you know, it's too soon even now to adjudge the cultural and social impact of these types of tools on the psyche of our society as it continues to develop. And right now, we find ourselves in this absolutely insane moment. And without, you know, minimizing the incredible severity, you know, of what we're all kind of collectively experiencing right now, it's also worth noting that this mandatory pause, like we've been put in timeout, and we're being forced to kind of reckon with, you know, how we walk upon this planet, I think is compelling the kind of conversations that will, in my optimistic strain, will lead us to a different way of living, not necessarily like the new normal. You know, I don't think we'll ever go back to the way it was before, but I think we have an opportunity right now to really rethink and reimagine and forge new systems in response to what we're experiencing right now, to, you know, create a better, more sustainable, community-based world.
Yeah. We are inherently vulnerable as a species. We live on a vulnerable planet, right? And this current situation, I think, is just put the mirror right in front of us, right? there is no place to escape to. And the way I think about it, especially, you know, if you consider mindfulness, right? We are, and, you know, you speak about fear a lot as well, and, you know, we are fearful beings. Like, fear is programmed into us in a, you know, on a level of DNA, right, for a reason, right? Because we're designed to protect ourselves, and there's a reason we're all a little concerned right now. The question right now to me is just sort of, you know, to what extent can I be mindful of what's going on inside of me, right? Can I be mindful of the fear, and where's the point at which I need to react, right? This dynamic between discovering fear, right, and discovering an inherently fearful state and situation, and then having the wisdom to respond to it intelligently and compassionately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's all that any of us can do. And I think you know, look, the fear response is normal, it's human. I wouldn't tell anybody that they shouldn't be afraid. Like, this is part of what makes us who we are. But I think in part, the fear response is being informed by a recognition of the fragility of our systems. We have this sense that we're in this post-history time where, you know, democracy as we know it will exist forever, and the world as we kind of understand it is like stable and locked in. And what we're realizing is that, you know, one little hitch or one little cog that isn't operating right, and the fabric of the entire machine starts to completely break down, and the domino impact of that is what we're seeing right now. And it's very severe. And I think it's making people realize, like, you know, where are the grown-ups? Like, I thought that I could trust in this system, and I thought that I could reliably, you know, sort of forecast my life based upon how I see the world, and to kind of recognize like, oh, well, these things are not locked in stone. And so much of, what I, the way that I kind of thought about the world is in part an illusion. I think is terrifying, but it's also, again, an opportunity to go inward and to, there's a bit of a shattering of the ego and a humility that can emerge to realize that there really is very little that we can control. We can control the thoughts in our head and how we respond to the world around us. We can't control the world events. We can't control the person sitting right next to us. All we can control is our minds and our response to the world. And when we focus on that, I think it grounds us in the moment, allows us to be more centered, and I think ultimately acts as an insurance policy to have a better, healthier, response to what is happening, as opposed to being hysterical or, resentful or frustrated or fearful or angry, or all of these very human emotions that we're seeing right now, because tempers are riding high and people are on a hair trigger. And it really, it's almost like a perceptual super, power to be able to see behind that and go, this person is just scared because their livelihood is being threatened, or, they've lost their job and they don't know how they're going to provide for their family. Of course they're scared. And I think with that, we can engender more compassion, and hopefully bridge this divide. We're so separated right now. I feel like there's two pandemics. There's the disease out there, and then there's these varying experiences that people are having based upon their respective information silos that's really dividing us. And I find that to be as toxic a threat as the disease itself. And so I think, the mindfulness returns us to a compassionate state that allows us to see and embrace our brothers and our sisters. And to me, that's the only healthy way forward and out of this.
Right. And that you touch on kind of that idea of lost connection and the kind of Johann Hari approach to kind of depression, alcoholism, and in some ways self-improvement. And I think in sport, we see that we get a bit of that. Was that the case for you, that you kind of found this identity and this connection through sport to a degree that kind of carries your operating system through today?
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. I love the endurance community, and I love the people, and I feel very connected to that community. I would say that but I'm also very, my participation in that has been very solo, like I train alone. I don't go on the group rides. I run alone. Like, these are my mindfulness practices, and I protect them as like solo endeavors and vehicles for spiritual growth and self-connection. So I don't know that, unlike a lot of people who are really, much more connected to that community than I am, that I would characterize myself in that way. But I do feel, strongly that Johann Hari is correct, and that so much of the mental disease and the depression and the suicides and the drug addictions are being fueled by this lost connection, this disconnection from communities, as we're dispersed like this diaspora across the country, ensconced in our homes and in our cars and in front of screens. And even when we're at work, we're in a cubicle, and we're not really connected to each other in the way that we're hardwired through our DNA to be. And I think it is important to recognize the moment that we're in right now, where we're forced to be geographically separated from each other. I see a celebration of community and connection through the screens. Like, we're finding a way to connect. We're ultimately, creative, industrious people. And so that's why suddenly everybody's going live and everybody's on Zoom, because we need this in order to be human. And I think, when this lifts, and it will lift at some point, that is one of the big lessons that I'll take away from this. And one of the things that I'm learning about myself, because my life is so much like it was before right now, that's telling me, like, I live too hermetically. Like, I need more community and I need more connection. I should be, you know, feeling that disconnection more than I am right now. And that's because I think that I have, you know, that's a growth opportunity for me that I'm really like wrestling with and understanding right now through this process.
Right.
I mean, it's been such a realization for us, you know, just going through the last few weeks. I mean, we usually sit together in an office with, you know, it's a small team, but still we're there together. But all of us are just hunkered down in front of our screens, just going through our to-do lists. But, you know, we're not really together. We're not truly enjoying each other's company. Like, why are we really sitting there together?
Yeah.
If it's not to, you know, if it's not to to truly be in community, right? To truly share this journey together, to share the highs and the lows, and just being able to reinvent this paradigm of work for us over the last few weeks has been such a gift, and is definitely going to make, you know, District Vision, like our little company, a very different project going forward.
Right. Yeah,
So,
that's cool. It's interesting too, because you are so into mindfulness and meditation. So it's almost worse when you have that realization, because it's like, I should know better. I'm the person who's doing all of these things.
Right.
And then when you uncover like, oh, there's more growth to be had, and here's my blind spots, you know, we have a tendency to be even harder on ourselves because we feel like we should have already, you know, be past that. But, you know, the growth never ends for any of us.
Yeah, we spoke to Ricky Gates about that on Saturday, and I was talking to him, and he was telling obviously about the run across the country where he ran from South Carolina to San Francisco, 3,600 miles. He learned some really important lessons, and he said it's, you know, 3-4 years on, it's amazing how often he needs to be reminded of those lessons. They don't stay with him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so frustrating, right? You think you should just get it, you know, and that's kind of like the ongoing, you know, joke in AA or in 12-step, like, really, you know, 20 plus years in, I still have to go to these meetings and be reminded of these things. Like, haven't I graduated yet? You know, it's like, we're animals of habituation. And I know that I need to be constantly reminded about my blind spots, or I will quickly revert back to, you know, unhealthy behavior patterns.
Right. What are those, you know, there's probably a few things in your habits in your daily life that kind of keep you there. What are those few things? It could be maybe something that you're eating, your nutrition. What is it that you do, those 2 or 3 things that you do every day that you find make a small but maybe important difference for you?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of the standard things that you hear about a lot. Like, one thing I do is, you know, I have the luxury, because I'm self-employed, I have the luxury of having domain over my schedule. So one thing I do is I do my very best to not schedule any meetings or phone calls before noon. And I try to protect those hours as my own. And that begins very early in the morning with a meditation practice, followed by journaling. I'm a big proponent of The Artist's Way, which is this book by Julia Cameron, all about unlocking creativity. There's some kind of daily practices in that, of which the most important to me is like this daily journaling habit of writing 3 pages every day. I like doing a gratitude list, like just jotting down really quickly the things that I'm grateful for. I think is a very healthy and helpful practice right now. And then, you know, I go out and I train. You know, I have to go and be with myself in nature, whether on my bike or on a trail nearby here. The trails are all closed now, so I have to run on the road, but, you know, we're all having to adapt. And those are the big ones. You know, I try to, you know, you guys probably know I've been plant-based for a long time, so I'll eat like a cornerstone of my daily nutrition habit is a green smoothie. So chard, kale, beets, beet greens, you know, lots of superfoods like chia seeds and hemp seeds, things like that. I try to have, you know, a really nutrient dense smoothie after I train. And that usually keeps my energy really high after a workout and able to work. I'll eat my big meal as dinner. Sometimes I kind of do an intermittent fast, but not every day. And, you know, those are a few of the simple things that I try to do every day.
I'm interested to hear more about your training, like specifically your physical training, your running and swimming practice. Like, you've got so many years of both physical training and meditation under your belt at this point. You know, this is something that we've been exploring since we launched our project. Is really, can running be a mindfulness practice? Can sport be a form of spirituality? You know, as soon as you say that, you get people, most people will tell you, oh yeah, running is my meditation. And, like basically we got to a point where like, oh yeah, yes and no, right? Not necessarily. And it's that we get that it's a quiet space. We get that it's you time, me time, but it's not necessarily a meditation. And in and of itself, it's not necessarily a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
I think you talked about this with Sam Harris, right? Like he's adamant, and I agree with him that yeah, there's a lot. I used to think, well, running, my wife is a huge meditator. She's much more experienced than I am and much more devoted and dedicated to it than I am. And she's been doing it longer. And 10, 12 years ago, when I was training for these Ultraman races, I would say, this is my meditation. And she allowed me that indulgence without saying anything. But I've come to realize, as I have become more entrenched in formal meditation, the distinction between the experience that I have when I'm training versus the experience of a proper formal meditation practice. And they are extremely different. I think it's fair to say that the training for me is a spiritual practice, but I wouldn't call it a meditation practice. There is a meditative aspect to it, but it is not by any qualitative standards meditation. Those are two different things. I find healing in the training, and I enjoy the connection with nature and being connected to the breath and all the things that come with the running and the cycling and the swimming as well. But they are qualitatively different. And I think, I've had an evolution with my relationship to endurance sports. It began as this spiritual vehicle for self-exploration that then became quite competitive and intense for a compressed period of time, a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And more recently, it's been really about doing it for the love and letting go of the competitive aspect of it. And that's actually more difficult for me than going 110% in and trying to be my absolute best and lining up at a starting line to lay it all out. Like, I know how to do that. I've been doing that for most of my life. What's much more difficult is to say, I'm doing this because this is who I am and I enjoy it. And it doesn't matter whether I come in last or middle of the pack or top 10%. That's not part of the mental calculus and not part of the why behind why I'm doing it. And that's has required more of me to arrive at that place, because it's requiring me that I set aside my ego or how I might appear to other people, or whether or not, others are going to judge me or anything like that. So, that's been interesting, because it's really forced me to confront my ego in a unique way, and to not when I look at my Garmin after a run, to not say, oh man, a certain number of years ago, I would have done this run at this pace with this heart rate, but now I'm doing it here, and to let go of that, because that's not what it's about for me anymore.
Right. Well, I think that the old saying, comes age, comes wisdom, right? Probably rings true here. There's a lot of runners, and I think a misconception that we might also be partially responsible for with the work we've done. It's really not about just forcing yourself to be mindful all the time, right? It's just training in mindfulness is a superpower in the sense that, this background awareness slowly builds up, especially if you do have a daily practice, and it gives you the ability to let the mind go and just have fun, right? And that is ultimately a lot of the time just what you want. You just want to get out into nature, listen to music or don't, but just enjoy the ride. But once you see those sort of emotional patterns emerge that you just know because you've seen them
Yeah.
coming for decades. You know, once you feel them resurface, then mindfulness can kick in and just just help you discern between what's ultimately going to be conducive to a joyful, happy ride, and what's ultimately just going to lead to more pain and more suffering.
Yeah,
So,
and I think, and this is another thing that Sam Harris talks about. It's not that you're not going to have that patterned reaction to something. It's just that the half-life of whatever that negative reactionary response is will be significantly reduced, and you'll be able to kind of reset more quickly. I also think there's a misconception that, mindful running means you're just going out and running like really slow and you're at peace all the time. That's not what it is. You can go and have like a really hard, intense interval workout and do it as a mindful runner. You're just being mindful of the experience that you're having. So it's not at the cost of going hard or training hard. It doesn't mean, you're picking daisies when you go out and do it every time. It just means that you have an awareness of the experience that you're having in real time.
Yeah, very true. How do you think about, what is at this point in your life, what are you still concerned about? Is there anything you're afraid of? What keeps you up at night?
Probably my kids, like worrying about what's going to happen with them. Am I fulfilling my am I being a good dad? Am I doing all the things that I'm supposed to be doing as a parent? That probably preoccupies me more than anything else. I mean, my wife and I went through a crazy financial dismantling many years ago where we were forced to really make do with very little for a long period of time. And I feel like I was really, my character was really formed out of that experience. And although there's a lot of economic, uncertainty at the moment, like I'm not scared about that. Like I've been through worse. And the position that I'm in right now is so much better than it was before. And I know I have the tools to navigate whatever's going to come. So I'm not really, scared about that. And what else scares me?
How do you think about
I'm
that?
not really I don't have a tremendous amount of fear about anything. It's really more of a preservation instinct about my children more than anything else. And I think, in terms of where my focus is and what I'm interested in, people are always like, what's the 5-year goal, or what are you working to? What's the big vision? And it's like, I'm just really grateful, incredibly grateful to be able to do what I do. And if all that happens is that I get to continue to do this a little while longer, that's pretty fucking good. And I'm pretty happy with that. But in terms of what I think about what are the ways in which, I can impact people's lives in the most powerful and impactful way. Not in terms of the audience needs to be bigger, but with the people who are already paying attention to what I'm doing, how can I enhance the quality of the experience that they're having so that it's not about fleeting inspiration or motivation. It's about really trying to catalyze changes that they can implement into their lives and sustain that have real, tangible results in their lives. So I guess that's what I preoccupy myself with.
Wow, that's beautiful. I mean, you and your wife, Julie, talked a lot about death on a recent podcast, I believe. And she really sees life, and it's very much it's very common in spiritual circles, and it goes back to many different spiritual traditions. Tibetan Buddhism, among others, is very much based on death as the ultimate contemplation, right, in life. And we'd be curious to hear how you think of death at this stage in your life, and in the context of family, and in the context of what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it quite a bit for the last year and a half or so. You know, my grandfather, who I'm named after, who was also an amazing collegiate swimmer, was captain of the University of Michigan swim team in the late 1920s, was an Olympic hopeful, and had an American record. In so many, unconscious ways, I have walked a similar path that he walked, even though I never met him because he died before I was born. And he died at 54 from a heart attack, and I'm 53. And I think about that a lot. My mortality is very, very much top of mind. And I think what we're experiencing right now is only exacerbating that. And I think we're having a cultural moment where we're really, breaking this grip of denial that we have around death. We live in a culture that whitewashes it from our daily experience. It's completely removed from anything that we see. And there's a lot of, interest and resources behind that impetus. And I think it's very unhealthy because it leads us to this place where we think it doesn't exist, or it's not going to happen to us, or it's some kind of aberration, when of course, intellectually we understand it's going to happen. But on some level, I think we think, well, maybe I'm going to elude that. And I think that notion is being smashed right now because of coronavirus. And ultimately, there's something healthy about that as well, because it's connecting us to our own mortality in a way that we're not used to. And it feels uncomfortable, and it might provoke an anxiety response, but ultimately I think it's in our best interest to make death part of our daily experience as a means of informing how to live better. To fully understand our impermanence is to recognize and value the preciousness of each day that comes.
Yeah, super valuable.
I think that's a really beautiful thought. There's a lot of people that we were speaking to when we've been researching this over the past week that want more information on your tent.
You sleep in the tent, right?
Yeah, I do.
How you pulled that off?
Yeah, I can show it to you. You want to see it?
We'd love to see it.
Yes, please.
All right, hold on a second. This is my shipping container office studio. Let me just show you guys around right here, which is where I kind of like work and write, but my tent's like right out here. I'll show you.
Right.
I'll flip this around. So there you go.
There's your abode.
That's where I sleep, man. Yeah. So.
Fantastic.
Do you have a mattress in there?
No, you have like a floor cover, right? You just have a floor cover, right?
No, I have a mattress in there. Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah. So I'm not like sleeping on the hard ground.
All right, you're glamping. You're glamping.
I was about to say,
Yeah.
I think that disqualifies
it's
glamping.
It's comfortable. It's comfortable.
And do you rise? Do you sleep and rise with the wake up with the sun? Then I assume that's your methodology, right?
I mean, it depends. I try. I have the luxury of not always needing to set an alarm. I mean, I woke up at 4:30 today.
Right.
But that's not every day. 3 days ago I woke up at 8, which is super late for me. But I generally wake up around 6 or so, something like that. Yeah, I go to bed at 9. I really prioritize sleep. I'm not like a martyr about it. Like I don't wake up at 4:30 to like say I wake up at 4:30. Like I'll naturally arise at that time most days. But I really try to get 8 hours of sleep. It's super important to me.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, Rich, we don't want to take too much of your time. This has been such a treat.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, you guys. I really appreciate it. This is really cool what you're doing. And next time I'm in New York, I want to come and see you guys.
Absolutely.
Well, likewise.
Yeah. Likewise in LA. Take care.
Right. Yeah. Thanks so much. All right. Take care, you guys. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.